Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's October 27th, 2022 program, Wind, Waves, and the Future of Energy on the Oregon Coast. This is the 8th program of our 2022-2023 programming year, and my name is Karen Knutson. I'm City Club's president. Welcome to everyone here with us in downtown Eugene and to our live stream and listening audiences. It is wonderful to see you and have you here with us today. For almost 30 years, the City Club of Eugene has been delivering our mission to build community vision through open inquiry by coordinating weekly programs and the discussion of topical, engaging, important community issues. City Club creates the space for civil discussions about civic issues. And today, we will dive into a conversation that combines ideas about Oregon's economy, its coastal recreation, and energy policy. Support for the City Club of Eugene is provided by our members and both business and in-kind sponsors. Our diamond sponsors are Kaiser Permanente, the University of Oregon, Peace Health, and Lane Community College. And we appreciate generous support from the City of Eugene and Lane County. You too can help to support City Club's mission and our weekly programming by becoming a member at our website, cityclubofelugene.org. We invite you to join us for City Club programs in downtown Eugene and live stream via YouTube, and we encourage you to ask questions of our speakers today, live at the microphone here in the room, by email, or via live chat. We'll have time for that Q&A after we've heard from all of our speakers. Thank you to City Club's President-elect and Program Committee member Andrew Kollick for coordinating today's program, and I'll now hand the microphone over to Andrew to introduce our speakers and today's discussion.
Thank you, Karen. I am Andrew Kollick. It's my pleasure to introduce this program and our speakers today. Just this week, Damian Lillard of the Portland Trailblazers made some news, not only on the court, but by saying that he had never been to the Oregon coast. And so many people said, "Are you kidding me?" Our 360 miles of coastline, whether you're an Oregonian or a visitor, is obviously beloved, from Astoria to Brookings. And this beautiful and bountiful coast is also home to some of the most promising sites for renewable energy development in the United States. In fact, just this year, the federal government identified 2 areas off the southern Oregon coast for future wind energy development and awarded a $25 million grant to Oregon State to build a first-of-its-kind wave energy facility off the coast of Newport. Now, while these projects could produce clean energy to power thousands of homes, there are significant concerns about potential impacts to the environment, the economy, and the broader community. And luckily today, we have experts who are here from the nonprofit, private, and public sectors who hold a diverse array of viewpoints about the future of energy on the coast and are actively working to determine the best way forward for our communities. Bob Eder of Lincoln County is a career commercial fisherman who currently serves on the Oregon Dungeness Crab Commission and is vice chair of Fishermen Involved in Natural Energy. Bob came all the way over the Coast Range to Eugene today, and we're very grateful for that. So thanks, Bob. Yes, clap for that. Absolutely. Shannon Souza of Coos County owns Soul Coast Companies and is co-founder of Oregon Coast Energy Alliance Network, or OCEAN. Thank you, Shannon. And we'll begin today by hearing from Jen Miller. She's the chief of the Renewable Energy Section in the Bureau of Ocean Management's Office of Strategic Resources. Jen, welcome to the City Club of Eugene, and thank you for leading us off.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be presenting. I do want to apologize. We tried to send one of our BOEM employees in person, but unfortunately she was sick, and so she was unable to make it. So I'm stepping in Jean Thurston Keller's absence. I know she really wanted to be there with you all in person today. So first, I just want to thank the City Club of Eugene for inviting us all to get together today and talk a little bit about offshore wind. And with that, I will kick off our presentation. Let me start sharing. And so as mentioned, my name is Jennifer Miller, and I am the chief of the Renewable Energy Section at BOEM in BOEM's Pacific region. And the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, our management is for the development of the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf for energy and mineral and mineral resources in an environmentally responsible and an environmentally and economically responsible way. Our jurisdiction is the U.S. West Coast, which is the outer continental shelf, and it extends from 3 to 200 nautical miles off the coast of California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. And it excludes areas that are included in the National Marine Sanctuaries. And BOEM does have quite an extensive offshore wind authorization process, and it is broken down into 4 major stages or steps in the process. And the first step is the planning and analysis step. And this step takes about 2 years. It kicks off with the establishment of an intergovernmental task force. There is typically a call for information and nominations about specific areas that are under consideration for leasing. There's the area identification process and some environmental reviews that all consider those areas that are identified. Next, BOEM moves on to a leasing process. This takes about 1 to 2 years. During this step in the process, that's when BOEM will publish leasing notices, a proposed and final sale notice, and those will be published in the Federal Register. This is when BOEM will conduct an auction or negotiate the lease terms, and finally when we would issue some leases. The next step would be the site assessment stage, and this is when when the lessee will conduct site characterization activities. There is often the receipt of a site assessment plan, which describes how a lessee will assess the wind resource of their site. There is the submission of a series of survey plans that describe how the lessee will survey and conduct site characterization activities, and then it culminates with the submission of a construction and operations plan. And then that moves us into the construction and operations phase. So once BOEM receives the construction operations plan, it takes about 2 years to review the construction operations plan. And that really is the meat of our permitting process. That's where we get a lot of details about where the facility will be located within the lease area, the number and the size of the turbines, what the inter-array or the cables that are connecting all of these offshore wind turbines look like, how and where the facility will be connected back to shore, and all of the site characterization information to support that facility. After that plan is reviewed, if the BOEM makes a decision to approve the construction operations plan with terms and conditions or modifications, or to not approve the plan. If the plan is approved or approved with terms and conditions or modifications, the next step is the submission of a facility design report and a fabrication and installation report. These are highly detailed engineering documents that describe one step further the nature of the facility, provides quite a bit of information and a review from a certified verification agent that all of the engineering and design is appropriate for the site conditions. And then there is construction and operations of the facility. It's anticipated that construction operation can take anywhere from 2 to 3 years. And then the operation of the facility in the newest leases is up to 33 years. There's a lot of information, so don't worry, I will show this slide a few times to describe where we are in the process with leasing on the West Coast. And so with that, this is a good idea of where BOEM is with offshore wind leasing nationally. And so from this, from this you can see that we have completed 10 competitive lease sales. There are currently 27 active commercial leases that have been issued. There are 2 active research leases that have been issued. BOEM has received and approved 14 site assessment plans. We've received and approved 1 general activities plan. We have approved 2 construction and operations plans. That would be the Vineyard Wind offshore wind plan and the South Fork Wind Farm offshore wind plan, construction operations plan. The NEPA process is underway on 10 other separate construction operations plans. We've received 5 additional construction operations plans in addition to the ones where the NEPA is underway, and we anticipate 2 more within the next 12 months. BOEM has issued 11 different guidance documents, and leasing is under consideration for 5 additional areas. The first steel in the water occurred in 2020 with the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, which is located off of Virginia. And most of the activity that is listed here in this center section of the slide has occurred on the East Coast. And BOEM is currently working towards issuing its first leases on the West Coast coming up in the next couple months. And so with that, we're back to the slide. And so the reason why I'm showing this again is because I want to talk a little bit about the status of where we are for potential lease sale in California. And where we are right now in California is we are in this leasing stage. BOEM published the proposed sale notice earlier this year in May. The comments closed August 1st. And then just recently, last week on October 21st, the California final sale notice was published in the Federal Register, and it established a date for the upcoming auction as December 6th. So that is hot off the presses, if you will. And the lease areas that have been identified in California, there are 5 different areas that have been identified for lease. There are 2 areas that are off the coast of Humboldt, off the coast of Eureka. And those 2 areas are referred to as they were included in the Humboldt wind energy area that was investigated, and there was an environmental assessment done on leasing activities for that area. There was also an environmental assessment done on the Morro Bay wind energy areas that has been finalized. And there are 3 areas that have been established for leasing off of Morro Bay. When identifying these leasing areas, there were 3 main goals in delineating the areas. The first goal was to maximize energy generation. The second goal was to try and make them as equal in commercial viability as possible. And then the third goal was to try and make them approximately equal size, because the size really does determine how much energy can be generated from the facility. So where we are with offshore wind leasing in California, just to sort of summarize where we are with the process in California, is, as I mentioned, the proposed sale notice was published in the Federal Register on May 31st of this year. The comment period ended for the proposed sale notice on August 1st. BOEM reviewed a tremendous number of very thoughtful comments, and we recently published the final sale notice in the Federal Register on October 21st. There was a minimum 30-day waiting period after the publication of the final sale notice, and the auction date was set for December 6th. There are a number of new advancements in the final sale notice that are described. That includes a series of bidding credits that BOEM has not previously offered, one for a lease area use bidding credit, community benefits agreement, and one for a general community benefits agreement, in addition to a 20% bidding credit for supply chain and workforce development of floating offshore wind. And now on to probably what you guys are more concerned about is, what is happening in Oregon. So where we are in Oregon is we are, a little bit, closer to the beginning of the leasing process. And so we have begun the wind energy planning, and that started really from about June of 2020 through January of 2022. BOEM looked at our offshore wind planning area, which is really, a good chunk of the southern half of the coast of Oregon. And then what we did was we defined some smaller areas. There were some proposed call areas that were identified in February of 2022. There are 3 different areas that were identified. And then the final call areas were identified in April of 2022, and that resulted in only having 2 of those 3 call areas identified formally and go out for call for information and nominations. So where we are for Oregon in the process is we are in that first stage, the planning and analysis stage. As I mentioned, the call for information and nominations was issued for those 2 areas in Oregon on April 29th of this year. The comment period has since closed, and so we are now in the area identification process for Oregon. We are doing a slightly different and new area identification process that is going to be very important for Oregon, where we are working with NOAA and the National Center for Coastal and Ocean Sciences, and we are taking a suitability modeling approach, and we are going to go out with draft wind energy areas out for public comment, and then we will formalize them as well. So we're adding an additional layer of public outreach and in comment in the process to try and be as responsive and transparent as possible. Okay, and as we mentioned, where we are right now with Oregon is we've issued a call for information and nomination, and this was a formal call to the public about the areas that we have selected for potential leasing, and then we also included a request for nominations of interest for development. And all of that information goes into the establishment of the wind energy area, and this is what would be identified through the area ID process, where I described we are adding an additional layer of providing a draft that goes out for public comment for the draft wind energy areas before they are finalized. And then those wind energy areas will become the basis for the lease areas that are established and that potentially go out for leasing further along in the process. So where we are in Oregon is, as I mentioned, we're a little bit behind where we are in California. We've started the state planning with it in 2020, and we developed the call for information and nominations earlier this year. The public comment period has closed. Right now, we are at the very beginning of the area identification process. We anticipate this will take at least 6 months, and we are going to work through draft wind energy areas that go out for public comment before the wind energy areas are finalized. And then after that, there would be some environmental assessments and public involvement while we do the environmental review for leasing activities. And then there would be a potential proposed sale notice, followed by another public comment period, and the final sale notice. There are additional comment periods that are associated with the publication of the environmental assessment that are not shown directly on this screen. And so that gives us to, where does the Oregon fall in BOEM's overall path forward for leasing that, for the first time we have really planned out for the next couple of years. And so in 2022, we had a very active year. We had the New York Bight sale in February of this year. It was record-breaking sale that resulted in over $4 billion going to the U.S. Treasury for leasing 6 different areas off of New York. It was followed by the Carolina Long Bay sale. As I mentioned, we're planning for the sale in California on December 6th, and that will offer 5 different lease areas in Central and Northern California. Next on the list is the potential sale of areas off of Gulf of Mexico, followed by some areas in the Central Atlantic, where a call for information and nominations has also been put out at the same time as we did for Oregon. And then we're looking at having a possible sale in Oregon in probably 2024 timeline, followed by potentially the Gulf of Maine. And that is a great summary of where we are on the Pacific, and really where BOEM is looking to the future. There are a number of goals that have been established by the administration, and that includes the 30 gigawatts by 2030 goal. It was recently followed up by a goal of 15 gigawatts of floating offshore wind by 2035. And that matches very nicely with the state of California's offshore wind goals to have up to 5 gigawatts by 2035 and up to 25 gigawatts by 2045. And in line with that is the Department of Energy's Earthshot, which has established a goal to reduce the cost of floating offshore wind by 70%, down to $45 per kilowatt hour by 2035. So all of that works together to try and establish a floating offshore wind industry that would be established here in the United States, and really be something that is helping to solve some of the issues that we're seeing with the climate at this moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Shannon, you want to take it from here?
I'm sorry I wasn't able to join you all in person, but I'm happy for the opportunity here. Let me get my share screen going. Yeah, I'll take it from the beginning. All right, how are we looking? Coming through okay?
We see you loud and clear,
Okay,
even on the radio.
great. Alrighty. My name is Shannon Souza. As Andrew said, I'm a sustainability consultant and contractor that's based out of Coos Bay. And I joined with some other volunteers about 3 years ago when we heard about floating offshore wind plans that Jen was just going through with us. And we were trying to learn more about that. Frankly, we didn't know anything about offshore wind, and I was invited to come together with some others that have different perspectives and backgrounds on the South Coast to better understand what is this floating offshore wind, what are its potential conflicts, what are its benefits. Ocean came out of that, Oregon Coast Energy Alliance Network. We did crystallize around offshore wind, but we've been actually also very active in the distribution system planning space, looking at renewable hydrogen and the deployment of solar and storage to help meet our needs. A lot of our motivation, and personally the reason that I am so motivated, I've been working in the renewable energy space since 2003. I also have been serving on Governor Brown's Resilience Mitigation Advisory team, and I represent the professional engineers of Oregon. Professional engineers take an oath that is to protect public safety. And I think a lot about energy systems and meeting our most basic needs as a resilience. This is a little bit of a dated map that you see here, but in general, it's pretty true for the coast. Those lines that you see are transmission lines, not necessarily rivers. And the circles that you see are where we generate electricity. Frankly, we don't do any electricity generation out on the coast. So our communities are completely reliant on imported energy to meet all of our needs. All of these transmission lines are very, very congested. It's very difficult to site new utility scale solar and wind in the interior of the state because of that. And specific to the coastal communities, all of our energy, whether it's being trucked in or piped in or coming through our transmission, goes through the Coast Range, a lot of very catastrophe prone routes. We also have this context that, as our FEMA Region 10 director likes to comment, we live in an area out on the Pacific coast that is subject to every catastrophe known to people, except for maybe lava and locusts. We're also trying to plan for a major Cascadia event, and as a planning scenario, contemplating what it will be like to be on our own for 3 to 6 months without any significant imports of energy to meet our needs. At the same time, our entire region is trying to retool our energy system to respond to climate change. On the mitigation side, boy, it's how quickly can we decarbonize so at least maybe we can slow down some of these climate changes for 7 generations down the road. And more immediately, how can we retool so that our communities have what they need during these increased power disruptions and frequencies and longevity, but also our system is behaving differently. The hydroelectric system is behaving differently. We don't have energy stored in snow like we used to. These two slides were from yesterday's presentation from Portland General Electric, talking to us about how the climate change is impacting their resource portfolio planning. Overlay onto that also that we are trying to electrify our transportation system. We are in a region somewhat because of the climate change refugees. We have higher than previously anticipated population growth, and we're retiring a lot of fossil fuel-based generation for our electricity. As a result, we need a ton of it. 350 gigawatts for the West of renewables and clean generation. To put that in context, right now we've got about 220, and that took us about 30, 35 years to develop. So we've got our work cut out for us. Specifically, when we look at the wind and solar for the Pacific Northwest, we start to see Oregon and Oregon's offshore wind show up as necessary to support our basic needs for the Pacific Northwest portfolio. When you really start to drill down on the offshore wind opportunity, there are a couple of things that are definitely catching the eyes of those that plan for grid resilience and reliability. The location is nice. Remember all of that transmission congestion in the interior of our state? That's because Oregon imports most of its energy. It's very congested with all of that energy coming from the east into the state. If we are to generate electricity in the ocean and push it backwards to the west, then we relieve some of that congestion and the grid's much more reliable. Also, when we look at the profile of when the offshore wind blows off of Oregon's south coast and California's north coast, it blows at really convenient times, meaning it tends to blow when some of our other intermittent resources like solar and even terrestrial land-based winds don't give us the output that we need. It also has a nice match with when we need those electrons to show up. When we first started investigating this, the general consensus was that we're not going to develop anything off the Oregon coast until we have some transmission lines that we can get it right down to San Francisco and sell all that power to California. Not a very popular prospect for those of us out on the coast. What we learned though in 2020 was that actually Oregon's grid could benefit directly from interconnecting with our own offshore wind from the coast. There is a tremendous potential for economic opportunity. General consensus is that these numbers that came out of USC last year from the Schwarzenegger Institute are pretty much mind-blowing. They're looking at the economic potential for California's 3 gigawatts of floating offshore wind. That's frankly the best, most recent data that we have. Those ranges that you see for the gross output and personal income really depend on how good of a job the state of Oregon and our neighbors do at preparing our workforce so we can suit up and show up, at preparing our communities so we can support those workers, and preparing ourselves to support some of that local content and supply chain. Ocean commented on Oregon's draft call areas, and we have been very pleased to date with BOEM's receptiveness to our comments and the others that we've heard from other stakeholders. Here are some of the highlights from our comments. We were very supportive of the general determining guidelines that were used. We do really want to see that the eventual wind energy areas are in potentially commercially viable areas. A lot of talk about moving everything to deeper than 1,300 meters. What that would mean for Oregon is it just would not be commercially viable for us to develop our offshore wind. We'd be down to 2,500 to 4,000 meters. And while that may be viable in the future, not quick enough for us to meet our energy goals around 2035 even. We were really interested in NOAA's Marine Spatial Planning tool and the data that it brings, seeing that it could help to address some of the concerns about the age of the fishing data, specifically that was used to develop the call areas, as well as the transparency that that tool offers to help give people a feel for how the relative values are being weighted. Been very pleased to learn that they're now engaged in defining our wind energy areas. We've been asking, and others have too, for a better socioeconomic implication, not just the economic opportunity for this, but what are the net impacts to our fishing communities and the fishing vessels? We have been suggesting for some time that there are alternatives to a programmatic EIS that we could be employing right now. Instead of postponing our leasing periods, that we could complement our leasing periods by working with the host of those that have been really engaging and digging down in the environmental effects research and starting a preliminary cumulative effects assessment. We recommended that BOEM contemplate some shoreward limits to the offshore wind energy areas that could limit our visual impacts. That also reduces our conflicts with vessels that are closer to the shore. We really like the visual simulations that they did for California and would really like to see some of those for some of our primary view sheds. We have a beautiful coastline and we'd like to keep it that way. We had recommendations for seabed morphology and substrate analysis. What is it exactly that these floating offshore wind turbines would be anchoring into? That's really important information, both on the environmental side and the technical side. And we've been requesting that a more holistic evaluation of the Port of Coos Bay in terms of its support for offshore wind, i.e. some of those services that the Port of Coos Bay could supply that would not require additional broadening and dredging of the port. And right now, we're really focusing on watching what's happening in California. We're very interested in helping the state facilitate some conversations so that the state of Oregon can provide BOEM with some priorities about what we might like to see in our lease provisions and bidding credits, some of those that Jen was just talking about that we see already showing up in California. And what would it look like to really tailor fit that to our Oregon state and coastal community needs? So that was a lot of information. I appreciate your time, and that's all I've got for you now.
Thank you, Shannon. Bob Etter, thank you for your wisdom.
City Club of Eugene, good day, and thank you for inviting me here. Just over these hills, on the edge of this county, lies the Pacific Ocean, the largest single remaining wild space on Earth. And it is awesome, precious, and a productive space. Handle with care. Here off the west coast of the United States, we are blessed with a very special slice of the ocean, an enduring ecosystem called the California Current. It's one of only 5 such systems in the world. These areas represent only 2% of the ocean, yet provide fully 20% of global seafood supply. Key contributor to this phenomenal productivity is something called upwelling. Nutrient-rich water from depth is churning upward, exchanging surface water, very much like tilling a garden. And the oceanographic engine that drives this upwelling is, you guessed it, wind. The current turbines that are proposed are not like the ones you see when you drive around our state. They are each 1/3 again taller than Seattle's Space Needle, 850 feet. What happens to this upwelling and to the ecosystem when we introduce hundreds of these turbines? We don't know. Yet call areas have been established, and thousands of square surface miles may soon be for lease. We need to fully understand the trade-offs, eyes wide open, before committing to an environment-altering project of this scale. We don't want to witness a terrible irony where our earnest push for clean energy does irreparable harm to the environment we're aiming to save. A little bit about us, fishermen. As a commercial fisherman, I see myself as part of this ecosystem. Our job is to fit in, be integrated. Two key ways we do this: take only an acceptable biological catch, which is sustainable, and two, do not damage the habitat in the process. Off our west coast, we have got this going on. It took literally thousands of years for the fishing industry to get here. For the longest time, people treated ocean resources as though they were inexhaustible. Of course, they aren't. We used to be an extractive industry. The wild protein resource is publicly owned, and we work in a public space. We don't lease or own our production locations, none of it. We only have your permission to harvest the resource. We are extremely regulated, and I have complained and questioned many regulations during the course of my career, but the net effect has been positive. We have achieved true biological sustainability. This is something we could be proud of, not we fishermen, we Americans. Healthy, sustainable fisheries is a high accomplishment and a gift that can keep on giving. Fishing is basically a primitive activity. We still use nets, traps, and hooks. I am a 21st century hunter-gatherer. And isn't it interesting that commercial fishermen produce this dynamite, wild protein, while creating a carbon footprint much lighter than other animal proteins, beef, chicken, pork, etc. We need your support to continue. We feel the process of developing offshore wind has been haphazard and rushed. The call areas are in the midst of where the California current is most dynamic. We certainly acknowledge human-caused climate change and support renewable energy development. We want a safe and sane approach. We agree with Oregon's 2 senators, Oregon's Coastal Caucus, and the 18 coastal municipalities, that's virtually all of them, that are asking to slow this process down, move the call areas further offshore, away from the heart of the current, and begin again. The depth we'd like to see these go is 1,300 meters. It is doable. It's being developed in other places, off the coast of Maine. They're going 56 miles offshore. They need to build a lot. They need to build to scale. The further offshore these devices are built, the safer it'll be. Even if there's no ecological issues, even if they don't murder birds, even if everything else is fine, in the very least, 200 of these monsters are going to create navigation hazards. We won't be able to go between them. They'll be linked with cables, and that's in their most benign state. So we want to be careful as we jump in. So our requests are, 1, study before you leave. Let's do our best to understand the consequences to our environment. Require a full environmental impact statement before leases happen and billions of dollars change hands. 2, properly test this massive new technology. There is offshore wind, but the devices that are going to be on this coast There isn't one in the Pacific Ocean. It's new. They're larger, they're anchored different. Everything you see in Europe and on the East Coast is hard set in steel or concrete to the bottom in shallow water. We're going to be floating. Test them. Try one or two to begin with. 3, if and when we build these giants, please put them offshore far enough to diminish as much as possible the danger to our ocean systems and its users. Again, handle with care.
Thank you, Bob. We will now take a short break as we transition to question and answers. Thank you. Welcome back to the City Club of Eugene. We have some time for questions. Let's dive right in. Our first question comes from Heather Mann. Heather, if you can hear me, log on, introduce yourself, and give us your brief question. Thank you.
Yes, I'm Heather Mann. I'm the director of the Midwater Trawlers Cooperative located on the Oregon coast. While offshore wind energy will likely play an important role in Oregon's energy future, it is beyond dispute that very little is known about how offshore wind facilities will impact fisheries, dependent coastal communities, the marine ecosystem and environment, even energy costs to the consumer. As you heard, California is well ahead of Oregon, and the state is auctioning off over 600 square miles for development in early December. So my question is, the nation's already on track to surpass the 30 gigawatts by 2030 promise. What is the harm in placing a moratorium on lease sales off Oregon until we have an opportunity to study the potential impacts utilizing real-world data from California and not simply relying on models to project those impacts?
Thank you. Jen Miller, do you want to chime in on that?
Yes, thank you, Heather, for your question. I would say right now, the way that the offshore leasing process works is that it's very state driven, and BOEM really tries to take our cue from the states and to react to local energy needs and sources of energy. And so we have been working with the state of Oregon to try and establish some areas to meet their planning goal of 3 gigawatts of offshore energy. And if the state would like to slow down or to stop the process, we try to be extremely responsive to state needs and priorities.
Thank you,
And
Jen.
during the review process, we do take a very careful and considered look at the impacts of these plans and the projects. But the way that the process works for BOEM is lease issuance only gives the opportunity to submit a plan to a potential developer. And then with that plan submittal is when we have all of the information necessary to conduct the critical and thoughtful environmental review that is necessary to establish, potential impacts that were described very, very eloquently by my fellow panelists. And BOEM takes that very, very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannon, I'll give you the opportunity to respond if you'd like.
Thanks. I'd love to. I would push back on the statement that we don't know anything about the environmental impacts or potential impacts to our coastal communities. There certainly is a lot that we don't know yet, absolutely. But we do know some things. There are some allegories that we can learn from Europe, where deployments have been in place for a longer period of time. And there's some of those impacts that are positive and constructive with respect to the impacts on the fishing stock, the eco-diversity. So it's an interesting question, but will we ever know completely until we actually have something to observe? No, absolutely not. In terms of what we would have to lose, what the potential harms could be, resource inadequacy of the energy system is a very real concern and a very real threat. The infrastructure, including the transmission planning and investments that need to be made, that planning takes so much time, and the permitting process. So in addition to the permitting process that is very thorough on the environmental implications of this for the turbines out in the ocean, same is true for all of the transmission, the port development that needs to occur. So all of these things, if we were to place a moratorium on offshore wind, then the unprecedented levels of focus in intellectual focus as well as financial focus coming from the federal and private industries that's really trying to set the table for what our Pacific Northwest and West Coast energy grid are going to look like. are not going to include us. And that means that we're going to continue to rely on increased imports from farther inland. As a result of that, our reliability and our resilience for Oregon, and more specifically for our coastal communities, is going to continue to precipitously decline. So I see those as very real concerns and potential losses if we were to establish a moratorium.
Thank you, Shannon. Our next question comes, we're keep going, Bob, and you'll get the next word, because we have lots of folks who want to ask questions. Our next question comes from online, and it's for you, Jen. It's what phase does BOEM consult with the tribes? And just for our audience, we invited the Confederated Tribes, the vice chair of the Confederated Tribes, to this forum, but she had a late conflict and could not join us. But Jen, if you want to talk for a moment about consultation with the tribes.
Yes, that's a great question. And we actually consult with the tribes throughout the process. And so, not just at the sort of opportunities for public comment and public engagement, but we continuously work with the tribes and have an open line of communication and consultation to, try and address any needs or concerns that they have throughout the process.
Thank you. Question here in the audience. Introduce yourself and tell us your question.
Sue Libby, and my question is, as I was hearing all of these presentations, what came to mind is that wind is another resource that can be extracted from our planet. The history of this country and many countries has been resource extraction entities coming in, whether it be timber industry, coal mining, extracting as many resources as possible, and then adios to the community without considering any social benefits that might accrue from this extraction process. So this might seem far-fetched, but for me as a member of the public, it would sweeten the pot for me, A, if I knew that the fish and marine life were being protected in some way, and B, if I knew that you were going to make a commitment to clean up the ocean plastics wherever you would be citing a new system for wind extraction. So I think there has to be a social component that I'm not hearing being discussed. And I guess that's my question, is what are you going to do about that?
Bob, do you want to address what you see as the necessary social component?
Well, I think you're making very good points, Sue. Some of this is possibly going to go in the other direction. It's going to take, as I understand it, at least 4 200-ton blocks to anchor each one of these devices, and we're looking to get 3 gigawatts in Oregon, about 250 of these big devices. And the blades, which are hundreds of feet long, are carbon fiber. I don't think that there's a way to recycle them. Those cement blocks are never coming off the bottom of the ocean. They're not going to be retrievable. And as far as I know, and maybe Shannon or someone could help with this, I don't think that the carbon fiber is reusable or recyclable, and they have, I think at best, a 30-year life. I have the same concerns. I share your concerns.
That's very short-sighted.
Shannon, you mentioned some of the economic opportunity. Do you want to chime in further on what you see as the opportunity, both economic and social, for the coastal communities?
Well, we've been really interested to see BOEM's lease provision. And what we saw in California is this new community benefits bid credit. It's 2.5%. We're curious, could that be much higher, 10%? And in California, much of the community benefit has specifically, it looks like it's really focused on commercial fishing vessel owners. Could that be expanded to the full coastal communities? Are there other investments in, for example, shoreside infrastructure to strengthen our fishing ports? advance communications to strengthen and enhance the safety of our fishing vessels. We know that our seafood processing plants are having a hard time meeting some of their effluent mandates. Investment, the traditional slew of community investments, investing in the school system, housing is another big one. If we're looking at 1,700 jobs to build all of this, where are they going to live? All of our communities, coastal included, are in a housing crisis. So there's a full suite of opportunity out there, and this is a unique period for the state of Oregon to entertain exactly what she was getting at. What are those community benefits? How do we bake them into this plan right from the get-go?
Thank you. Next question, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, can I chime in really quick, if you don't mind?
Sure, very briefly,
Okay.
please.
So I just wanted to mention a few things. The first one is that there are decommissioning requirements in the renewable energy regulations, and that requires the return of the seabed to the original state. And so part of the leasing process is getting a decommissioning bond, which includes enough financial commitment to take care of those decommissioning obligations. And so part of the permitting process would be the removal of any structures post decommissioning. And I think the current regulations are to below 10 meters from the seabed. So I just wanted to mention that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that with the California leases, there is the inclusion of 3 separate bidding credit components. There is a 20% of the cash bid for supply chain and workforce development, and that would include things like port infrastructure improvements, vessel improvements, access improvements to local ports and harbors. In addition to that, there is a lease area use, 5% bidding credit for establishing a community benefits agreement with communities, stakeholders, or tribal entities that use the lease area or harvest any resources from the lease area. And then there is an additional general community benefits agreement that is also for 5% of the cash bid, and that is for communities, stakeholder groups, or tribal entities that would be potentially impacted by the development. So the concerns about, the impacts to local communities is something that BOEM heard very loud and clear, and it was definitely a priority of the state of California. So one of BOEM's responses was to work very closely with the state and to do our best within federal law to try and provide some opportunity for community benefits agreements associated with the development of these projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Time for one more lightning round.
Yes, Dan Solitz, I've got a question and a request. The question is, whose forecast is that? And it sounds like a big number, and it reminds me of the Bonneville Power notice of insufficiency in 1977, bringing on the attempt to build 4 more nuclear power plants in the Northwest. And the request is, when you talk about the capacity of these things, I really would like to hear real production numbers, not the maximum amount that they could make if the wind were blowing at 100% all the time. So if you could talk about an average annual megawatt hours, it'd be really easy to figure out what size of plant you're talking about. Thank you.
I think that was directed at me for the forecast for the energy demands. There are a couple of, there are 3 major contributors that have all been coming up with similar numbers. One of them, you mentioned BPA, they are part of the Northwest Power Planning and Conservation Panel, and they just updated their 2021 report in 2021. So that's where you see that 350 gigawatt number coming from. Simultaneously, the entire West Coast is going through a modernization of our resources in the energy sector. Previously, we didn't compare notes about who was using what and what our forecasts were. We're doing that now. It's called the Western Resource Adequacy Program. It's brand new. And what we're finding there is that we're increasingly sharing our information and finding out that those forecasts might actually be a little bit lean. But the Western Resource Adequacy Program will allow us greater flexibility to share those resources so we don't have to overbuild. And then thirdly, there are a couple of different national, not agencies, but corporations that specialize in modeling to support energy planning. So the third one was actually brought on to help the state of Oregon contemplate what became our clean energy goal. And they did a study of clean energy pathways for the state of Oregon. And they're all coming up with very, very big numbers. The second part of that question was talking about capacity factors. And that's a great point. The capacity factors that we're actually seeing off the coast of Southern Oregon and Northern California some of them are as high as 65%, which blows everything else out of the water. For planning purposes, we're using 50%. But when I was talking about the way that the profile of the offshore wind complements our resources and our demands, that's really drilling down into some pretty high resolution work that our national labs, both Pacific Northwest National Laboratories and National Renewable Energy Laboratories, have been doing around that shared wind resource between Southern Oregon and Northern California, and really drilling it down to specific weeks of the year. What are we looking at in terms of actual megawatt hours landing on the coast? And they're seeing a really nice, tight, synchronous system come into play. So that's another big piece of the attraction for the wind. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you very much. That, unfortunately, is all the questions we have time for today. I'm going to hand the podium back over now to City Club President Karin Knudsen.
Thank you. This has been our October 27th, 2022 program, Wind, Waves, and the Future of Energy on the Oregon Coast. One of the things that I absolutely love about City Club is that every week it offers this opportunity to learn more about issues that we may not be aware of, to engage together in community, to see each other more clearly and understand the difficult questions that we have to answer today in our communities, but also looking into the future. And I appreciate so much our speakers for the education that they've offered to us today. Before we say goodbye for this week and thank our speakers one last time, I would also like to recognize City Club's Diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities that we serve. More information is available at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians to question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. And you can learn more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare provider for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and you can learn more at peacehealth.org. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to Lane County and the City of Eugene for their support. Thank you also to today's Sapphire sponsor, AARP Oregon. AARP is dedicated to empowering people aged 50 plus and to keeping Oregonians informed, engaged, and active. You can learn more at states.aarp.org/Oregon. And thank you to today's gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Sacred Earth Botanicals, Ferguson and Fife Dentistry, Homes for Good Housing Agency, Headshots Eugene, and Hummingbird Wholesale. Thank you to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing, LLC, and Dotson's Photography. And of course, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC 89.7 FM, for airing City Club programs on Monday nights at 7 p.m. You can find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC as well as our YouTube channel and as podcasts. So please look into what we've been talking about and share. Next week, on November 4th, please join City Club for a program about literacy in Oregon, challenges and solutions. Parents, caregivers, education professionals, community members, you are not going to want to miss this. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, Oregon students were struggling to read, with less than 1/2 of students reading proficiently by the 3rd grade. On November 4th, City Club will welcome 3 experts who will speak to this crisis and to its challenges as well as possible solutions. The following week, City Club will take the week off in honor of the Veterans Day holiday and then return on November 11th with a program on the state of the UO with Interim President of the University of Oregon, Patrick Phillips. If you have a suggestion for a future City Club topic or a question about one of our upcoming programs or for one of our upcoming speakers, please visit cityclubofeugene.org or send us an email at info@cityclubofeugene.org. It has been our pleasure to welcome you to the City Club of Eugene today. Thank you again to today's speakers, Bob Etter, Shannon Souza, and Jen Miller. We appreciate your time and everything that you have offered to our community. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.